So actually, I really didn't want to make a video about this, but YouTube keeps on harassing me. These videos keep on showing up in my feed claiming The Batman was like some sort of masterpiece or something. Some sort of work of art. Like, this is our Odyssey. This is our Shakespeare. And I was just like,
What?
it's okay, I guess. Like, okay. And then they're like, no, it's good. I'm like, okay, leave me alone. No, it's good. Leave me alone. I don't know you dirty hooker. So now we're here. I'm making the video. The Batman, it's an average movie. It has a lot of good, it has a lot of bad. Thanks a lot. Subscribe. No, okay. We're gonna do the real thing. Okay. So, a little background. I used to be a Batman boy. I used to be a real Batman fanboy. I like Batman, he's pretty cool. Actually, I used to really love the Christopher Nolan Batman movies. But as of recently, I thought they're a little bland. They're kind of smart, crowd-pleasing movies. They're really enjoyable to watch, but they're kind of like garlic bread. You know, garlic bread is really good. But garlic bread can only get you so far. They're really good the first time you watch them, and they're fun on subsequent viewings, but they're not as good as I think they could have been. At least that was my view before watching The Batman, and I'll explain what I mean later. Well, just to be clear, this is not going to be some sort of The Batman hating video, because honestly, there's some things that this movie does really great. The first 15 minutes of this movie had me so grabbed in. The interpretation of Batman pulled me in quicker than any other interpretation of Batman has so far. Batman is almost like a serial killer who doesn't kill. Stalking, lurking, LARPing as a normal person, getting near his victims, striking fear into people. I really like to see him just fighting normal people. It's not like he's trying to save the city. He's just beating up people for beating up people, which is the root of all superheroes and why superheroes are cool, because they stop robbers and they stop drug dealers and they stop these people. That's the reason superheroes are cool, not because they save the universe. The way that they show Batman signal, specifically stopping graffiti and stopping crimes, was actually really cool to show that he is an inspirational figure changing things. All of that I really enjoyed, and I really enjoyed the intro to him. Seeing him talk to himself and, in effect, the audience in journal, I thought was going to be the beginning of a great movie, because it was going to be like a noir film where the detective is always talking and thinking out loud. And it was going to be really cool because Batman was going to get to be the main character in his own movie for once. But that didn't happen, unfortunately. It would have also given us a lot of insight into what the character was thinking. It only happens like twice and then once at the end. So he doesn't speak that much during the movie, which would have given us a lot of key details on who he thinks the Riddler is, what type of person he thinks he is, who he thinks Catwoman is. All of this stuff would have been really insightful to learn. We would have actually gotten to hear his journals, but he just stops them. I love the obsessive way that Batman reviews his failures and his victories over the bad guys. He's an insomniac who just lives and breathes Batman. Like Rorschach from Watchmen. Just is Rorschach. I really liked the cinematography, and I really loved the filming and the environments of it. It's the best looking Batman movie. It's the most well realized Gotham City ever. It's not lost on me that takes a lot of hard work, and I appreciate that. I appreciate these things, okay? I am not negative man. I am not evil. I am not evil black hole man who hates everything. But let me explain to you where this movie got it wrong. Within the first 15 minutes, it sets up a lurking, stalking Batman trying to find his victims. And the criminal is set up as a serial killer. So they're dark reflections of each other, which is potentially the greatest setup for a Batman movie ever. A stalking, alone, insomniac Batman trying to find one man in the city who's going to tear it all apart through his murders. They're both the different sides of the same coin, trying to bring justice to Gotham City. lurking after people they see are criminals, trying to find the truth. And, you know, honestly, on paper, it sounds better than The Dark Knight. Sounds better than, like, any Batman movie and most superhero movies, period. But unfortunately, that's not really what we got in the end. So, I'm gonna break down what went wrong now, after all the main positives are out of the way. The core problem with this movie is, in fact, the villain, the Riddler. Now, in most comic book movies, they're dealing with characters like Scorpion, or Vulture, or Big Wheel. Really low-tier comic book villains that essentially the writers designed to be cool-looking foes for the hero to fight. But we're talking about Batman. All of Batman's iconic villains stand on their own 2 feet and don't need to be adapted in the same way that most comic book villains do. As an example of this, in Spider-Man 2, Doc Ock is made to want to create fusion to save the world, and it is tied into him wanting to help Earth. It's also tied into the AI in the back of his tentacles, and it's tied into the death of his wife, and yada yada yada. Okay? Well, none of that's really in the comics. But you gotta put that in because it's gotta be a good movie. And it is a good movie. But if you were just to put in the comic book accurate Doc Ock, he'd just be some crazy guy that radiation made him crazy. And that's really boring. The same is true for Sandman in Spider-Man 3. And it's true for lots of different villains in superhero movies. The deal is, you didn't need to change the Riddler, because the Riddler is already a fully realized character with concrete goals that are interesting and thematically deep enough to create a great movie-going experience. He's not the obsessive, uncontrollable way that the Riddler is shown in this. I knew from the trailers walking into this that I wasn't going to like the Riddler's interpretation. They actually talked about this in making The Dark Knight. They almost made Heath Ledger's Joker wear black. They wanted to desensitize the fantastical elements of the source material in order to make it seem more realistic. But in the end, they chose to go with purple. Why? Because that's who the character is. The character of the Riddler is a bowler hat with a mask, with green and question marks everywhere. Trying to defantasize the fantastic is kind of ridiculous to me. Because I feel like Nolan would have even put a green hat on his head and given him a cape. It's kind of silly to see him only as a Criminal Minds villain and not as a man who actually sees himself as a supervillain and dresses as such and acts as such. That being said, I could still have enjoyed the movie if it was a serial killer, Zodiac killer inspired Riddler. Because ultimately, I mean, they get characters wrong all the time and it ends out great. Like Thanos from Avengers. That's not his comic book motivations. But, honestly, the Thanos from the Avengers is, like, awesome. So it's like, you know, whatever. When an interpretation is good, an interpretation is good. But the other element of the whole Riddler thing is this interpretation is bad. Now, at the beginning of the movie, it was pretty creepy. All the murders and him controlling the narrative of the media and really ragdolling Batman around with who he's murdering and trying to get him to look into different subjects did make the Riddler seem like a foe not to be messed with. But as the movie goes on, and specifically when Batman meets the Riddler, it becomes apparent that the Riddler is just some mentally challenged social outcast who doesn't understand anything about anything, and he is literally just some crazy person.
Oh, no, 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 no! Nobody! No! This is not how this was supposed to go! I had it all planned out!
He's not actually an equal opponent to the Batman. He's just some crazy person who got some crazy people to follow him online, which is really lame. He probably wears a diaper. None of his followers even know how to use the guns that they shoot at the end. And they can't aim. They shoot like 3 or 4 shots at the mirror, and they hit like one of them. They're constantly missing Batman while he's in front of them for like 20 minutes. It's honestly ridiculous to see how incompetent this villain is, and how simple his riddles are as well. I was blurting out the answers to the riddle in the middle of the movie while I was watching it, and people were like, shh. Be quiet. Quiet. We're watching the movie. Shh. Nah, they're saying shh because they were all sleeping. This movie's boring. And I like boring movies, but this movie's really boring. Now, there's a quote from Christopher Nolan when he was talking about Batman Begins. He said he didn't think that the Batmobile would fit into his world, and the studio didn't mandate it. But he felt like the audience really wanted the Batmobile, so he actually did go ahead and put it in. He had to change it a lot to put it in, but it actually ended up being one of the best part of all of these movies. But at the end of the day, all of the elements of Batman are there in this movie. You have Catwoman, you got the Batmobile, you don't really have like a traditional Batcave, but it's whatever, it's pretty close. You have like a Wayne Manor looking thing, but the problem with it is it's not done in an exciting manner. The closest thing I would say to an exciting sequence in the movie is the very first fight scene that is very awesome of Batman beating up a bunch of people. And I think that's what people want to come to the movies and see, is Batman beating up a bunch of people. And that scene was cool, because he not only uses his strength, he uses a couple of gadgets as well. And also, I guess the Batmobile chase after Penguin was pretty cool, but ultimately it was kind of boring in comparison to The Dark Knight and the Batman Begins chase scenes. And you say, oh, well, this is a different movie. It doesn't have to think about that. No, it does have to think about that, because it's coming after those movies. You can have your little weirdo investigation detective movie in the Batman franchise. You can say, oh, well, don't criticize it for being boring. Don't criticize it for not having action in it. But this is a franchise. You expect people to come to the Batman movie and get like 3 or 4 action scenes in it and be happy with that. And most of them are just like kind of short action scenes in a 3-hour movie. You expect them to really care about this type of movie when there's not even that much excitement in it? The scene in Batman Begins where they have the cop chase is really exciting and really fun. Now, fun's a very interesting word to mention in this context, because there's barely any jokes in this movie. I used to think there was barely any jokes in Christopher Nolan's movies, but if you go back and you look at it, really, it's just the third act has less jokes. And in specifically The Dark Knight Rises, there's significantly less jokes for like the second half of the movie. But the movies are usually always winking at you. They have a lighthearted nature about them. They're having fun. They're always making jokes and banter. Even if they're not made for laughs, they're designed to create an atmosphere of fun and joy. Because everybody knows people dressing up in these costumes is kind of ridiculous. And these movies are not horrible to watch. They're fun to watch. There's lots of laughs in the Christopher Nolan Batman movies.
I hope you're not a member of the fire brigade.
I gotta get me one of those.
He is in a vehicle.
Make a color?
It's a black tank.
Right?
That's right, sir. Any psychotic ex-boyfriends I should be aware of?
Oh, you have no idea.
There's barely any laughs attempted in this movie. There's not much wit. There's not any giggles. It just feels like kind of a miserable experience. Which, again, I'd be fine with if it was a little shorter. If it was like an hour and 45 minutes of Batman tracking down this serial killer has political goals, then that'd be one thing, and that'd be really cool. But this movie is 3 hours, and it doesn't feel like it needs to be at all. You have tons of scenes in the movie that are just too drawn out. They're not edited in interesting ways, and they don't really lead anywhere. I'd say the first 2 hours of the movie are the strong point of the movie, and I really like them. But the thing is the payoff of a mystery is just as important as the mystery itself. And the payoff of the mystery in this movie is that Carmine Falcone runs the police and runs pretty much everything in Gotham City, which is a fine enough twist. It's been done before. A good example would be Kingpin in the Daredevil TV show, which was done very well, but it also had a lot more time to do it successfully. And I wasn't expecting it to be done as well in a movie with less time. But the entire third act should have been focused on Carmine Falcone's power if that's what the twist was going to be. Carmine Falcone should have been the main villain of this movie if that was the twist. A man who controls the justice system and the criminal underworld. It's a terrifying idea. The Riddler shouldn't have even been the main bad guy in this movie. The entire last action sequence of this movie feels totally counterintuitive to the entire film of less action. They just suddenly make up, oh, there's a seawall, and yes, I know, I saw there was newspapers that mentioned seawall and walls before in the film. But they just, oh, by the way, there's a seawall, and it blows up, and now there's an emergency, and now there's this big action scene. And it's like, oh, okay, well, that's kind of stupid. At least in the Christopher Nolan movies, even if you would say the third act got a little too big for its own good, they were set up. In Batman Begins, the microwave emitter whatever machine was set up within the first couple minutes of the movie, with the flower being the root of the core theme of the movie, which is fear. In The Dark Knight Rises, the nuke was set up within the first couple minutes of the movie again, with Bane getting the scientist. So it's like, yeah, I kind of get it that you want to do like a big action sequence at the end. Not only was this action sequence not exciting, it just came out of nowhere when the movie already felt like it should have been ending. And it wasn't an exciting action sequence. Batman gets shot like 5 times in it, or he gets shot like a ton of times in the movie, which just makes the movie kind of boring. I only remember one time Batman was shot in the Christopher Nolan movies. And it packed a lot of punch. It was like, whoa, Batman might be dead. In this one, he's just getting shot all the time. What the heck is the deal with that? What are you doing? What are you doing? Okay, so like another problem with this movie, I guess this is how modern filmmakers film their movies, is they film 17 hours of footage like it's a documentary series instead of writing a clear story. As someone who makes 20-minute long videos on YouTube, I completely understand 100% what it means to be a $100 million film director. I fully understand what the director's going through. Totally and completely. But at the same time, it's like, look, dude, you can't film 4 hours of material for this movie. This is not a comedy. This is not a documentary. You have to have an end goal. Was this movie supposed to be 3 hours when they started filming it? Was this movie supposed to be 2 hours and 30 minutes? Was this movie supposed to be 2 hours? How long was this movie supposed to be? And how do they create so many redundant scenes? Like, yes, I understand when you're making a movie, there's deleted scenes. But it feels like this whole movie could have been a deleted scene. They similarly talked about this when they made The Last Jedi, another film that seems like they just threw a bunch of stuff at the wall and saw what sticks. They have like an hour of deleted scenes. How does that even make sense? I guarantee you when you look at Christopher Nolan's filmography, he probably had 1 or 2 or 3 deleted scenes from Batman Begins, maybe 1 deleted scene from The Dark Knight. And by the time he got to The Dark Knight Rises, he probably didn't have even 1 scene that was deleted. Because he writes the script, and then he films the scripts. He doesn't base his editing process in his filmmaking process based on, we're going to film a bunch of stuff, and then what tests good with audiences is what we're going to put in the movie. That's not how you make a movie, and that is how you made this movie. So don't give me that, oh, this is some sort of brilliantly crafted movie. This movie was made by filming a bunch of stuff and then testing it with audiences. Don't you give me that this movie is art, okay? This movie would have been great with the same exact crew and designers of the environments and the set, costumes and all of that, but just with a different writer and producers. Because this movie lacks a good conclusion. This movie just is kind of aimless and going all over the place. It doesn't know where it's going. No. The movie ends on Batman riding on a motorcycle and Catwoman riding away from him on the motorcycle. And it's just kind of like, I guess that's the end. It just packs no punch. It's just some scenes in a sequence. A couple of the scenes are really good. A couple of the scenes I really liked. A lot of the ideas I really liked. But it just feels like this is Diet Batman. Like, this isn't a movie. This is like test footage or something. This is just filmed to be filmed. Like, oh, We filmed 15 minutes to prove that we can make a Batman in this style. Except they filmed 4 hours. There's no conclusion. There's no thematic punch. There's no real statements about society. Society's really bad. Okay. Yeah, we knew that. And Batman probably can't fix that. Well, I mean, the Nolan movies never said that. Really, none of the other movies really said that. So I guess they're kind of taking the darker side, the darker view on it. But that's really all we get. Batman probably can't fix this. Okay. Well, thanks a lot. And we get like an MCU teaser at the end for Joker and the Riddler. Like, what kind of joke is this? At the end of Batman Begins, they set up Joker as a villain because it was like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to see what they do with the character. This is set up like, oh man, you can't wait to see what Doc Ock does whenever he fights with the Green Goblin, and then they make the Sinister Six. It's like, I don't care about the Sinister Six. I don't even like the Riddler as a character. I don't even know who this Joker as a character is. Why would I care if they team up? What a ridiculous idea. It's like, you totally dropped the ball on this character. You made him incompetent. The key to his riddle was taking his floor off in his apartment. The key, the puzzle piece key to all of this, was a tool used to take the floor off. And it's like, is that clever? No, it's not clever. Why are you doing that? What is this movie? This isn't smart. Now, I'll give the movie this. Within the last hour, it did almost have me, because there was a scene in which Batman meets the Riddler at the asylum, and that scene almost had me really hard, because the idea that Batman would face off against his mental opponent, obviously the confrontation would not be in some huge bombastic fight. Except, of course, it was, because movie, I guess, because in the 3 hours of movie that they wanted to put in the movie, they had to make at least some of it exciting, even though they could have made the rest of the movie exciting and then make the ending interesting and thought-provoking. They didn't do that. They made the ending somewhat exciting, yet a terrible action sequence, and then they made the rest of the movie kind of boring, yet somewhat interesting at the same time, but lackluster for general audiences. Yeah, what a brilliant move, Matt Reeves. What a brilliant move. It appears in the context of the scene that Riddler is telling him that he knew he was Batman all along, which would have been amazing to have a serial killer facing off against corruption in Gotham City, the polar opposite of Batman. Batman's searching for him, the serial killer constantly getting in Batman's head, and then the serial killer ends up knowing who he is and claims that he's corrupt himself and putting him on trial in a sense. How would Batman respond to that? Can Batman allow his secret to get out? Is killing the bad guy on the table? Can he convince the bad guy that he is actually good for Gotham City and that he'll clean up the corruption? Can he convince the bad guy to be quiet? All of these questions would have been great. And although I agree that it really shouldn't have even been the Riddler in the end, even if it had been the Riddler, if they would have pulled the trigger on this idea and had the Riddler know Batman's identity, it would have been really cool. I would have been like, wow, dude, this is something unique. It reminds me a lot of in the TV show Sherlock and in the Sherlock Holmes movies, the confrontation between Sherlock and Moriarty is a confrontation of minds. And also in the first Sherlock TV show episode, the confrontation at the end is a contest of minds, not of physical fight. And that's really cool. And that would have been really cool to do in a Batman movie. I would have really liked that. But that's not the direction they went. This movie does not have enough to say, or a clear enough story, or a well-structured enough story to be 3 hours. 3-hour movies that are really good are really hard to make. A good example is Lord of the Rings. Another good example would be, honestly, The Dark Knight Rises. It's almost 3 hours. I think it's a very well-paced, well-made movie. A good example would be The Great Escape. It's almost 3 hours long. Just watched it the other day. I had no idea it was almost 3 hours long, because it just briskly went through and you were sucked into it. It's a great movie. Another great movie is Once Upon a Time in the West, which is so confusing the first hour of it, but once you finally start to understand what's going on, the mystery reveals itself. And not to mention, it's edited way better than this movie. This movie is flatly edited, which is obvious because they didn't even know what they were going to put in the movie and what they were going to keep out. So how do you even emphasize things that you don't even know are going to be in the movie when you're filming it? So there's great 3-hour movies, and then there's bad 3-hour movies. In this context, I think this movie was not exactly a great one. It doesn't do much with its length. You could have cut a lot of the scenes. It could have cut the scenes that are there down a little bit. This movie could have easily been in a 2-hour and 40, 2-hour and 30 movie. And I think people would have reviewed it better. I do love getting into the atmosphere of Gotham and seeing Batman do the technical work of a detective. But you can have little tiny bits of that, or 1 or 2 long scenes of that. You can't have a huge amount of the movie be that if it doesn't go anywhere. And it didn't really go anywhere in this. It's like, okay, Batman caught the Riddler at the end. Some guy ran the city, and the Riddler just shoots him, and then that's the end of that. Like, oh, okay. There's no concise, disciplined eye behind the camera, understanding what to put and not put. Another thing I want to talk about is the casting. Robert Pattinson is... oh, what is this? It's a bird? That's kind of weird. Oh my gosh, it's flying away. Well, okay, I may have gone too far this time. Oh gosh, what have I done? Okay. Robert Pattinson has a lot of stupid stuff in this movie that he does. He literally tells Alfred, "You're not my father." Like, what kind of joke is this? This is Batman. This is The Dark Knight. He's supposed to be 30. This is a joke, okay? On one hand, I really like Paddington, whatever his name is. I like this guy's interpretation of Batman. But on the other hand, he's a little whiny emo kid. And I kind of thought they might do this walking into the movie. But I'm kind of surprised that they went as far as they did. Another negative element of this portrayal of Batman is Bruce Wayne is non-existent. Now, Bruce Wayne is actually Bruce Wayne in like maybe 3 scenes of this movie. Bruce Wayne, as Bruce Wayne, has probably a total of like 20 or 30 lines of dialogue in this movie. He is not a public figure, and the director said he wanted him to be like some sort of private weirdo. And it's like, well, that's not very interesting at all. That just means he's not a character. And it's not a new interpretation. We've actually had that interpretation twice. We had it in The Dark Knight Rises, and then we had it in Batman vs. Superman. We just got done having it. Why are you doing that interpretation again? Now I understand you wanted to do the obsessive, crazy kind of Batman, where he's almost always Batman. He's always LARPing as a homeless person in the subways, looking for criminals, so then he'll change into Batman and fight them. I understand that, but the Bruce Wayne persona is important because it not only answers the city, what does Bruce Wayne do with his spare time? It also helps us see a glimpse into Batman's personality and his humanity. That the fact that he can be a normal person if he wanted to. He could live a normal life. We don't see any politics relating to Wayne Enterprises. We don't see him at any public events. We don't see him being a playboy. We don't see him anything. And he doesn't have to be a playboy. You can do many different types of interpretations with Bruce Wayne. But the way they took it was, we're not doing an interpretation. He has no interpretation. He's just a mystery. And that's really stupid to me. Even if it was only a couple scenes, I think they should have shown him as a millionaire just a little bit. On his free time in the weekends, having to keep up appearances because he's gone for like 7 days a week on the streets and then in the Batcave reviewing the crimes that happened last night, and then investigating, and then on the streets again the whole night. He just doesn't sleep. So somebody who's never in public light has to make photo ops at some point. He has to do something in order to make it clear that he's not Batman. It kind of neglects that whole aspect, and they mention it a lot in the movie that, oh, the Wayne legacy is on your shoulders, and he says he doesn't care, basically, just like Christian Bale did. But in Christian Bale's movie, a huge amount of the movie was dedicated to the politics of Wayne Enterprises, the money behind it, gaslighting the public, making sure they don't know that he's Batman. And in this movie, it just feels kind of empty, because he just feels like a rich, crazy person who lurks in the night and fights people. So his legacy doesn't matter at all in the public's mindset. A public figure. He's just some weirdo whose parents were killed. They were important, but he's not important. Kind of ruins the point of Batman a little bit. Also, I'm tired of hearing people complain about, in Batman vs. Superman, they show Bruce Wayne's parents dying, and in The Amazing Spider-Man, they show Uncle Ben dying, and that's retreading ground. And it's like, no, it's not retreading ground. You have to have the origin there. Now, you can keep it small. You don't have to do a 10-minute scene around it. Or you can show it in other ways other than showing it directly. But you have to explain it, because for the first half of this movie, it's not really clear why Batman's doing what he's doing if you have no external knowledge of the source material. And it's also not clear at all in the movie why he dresses like a bat. And you say, well, everybody knows that. No, everyone doesn't know that. And it could have been a 1-minute scene where you answered 2 questions, or it could have just been his narration that they stopped doing in the movie for no reason. Not knowing the core motivation of your character for a long time of the movie, or not at all, is a definite hole in this movie. These superheroes are nothing without their origin, and you have to at least explain enough so the audience can understand the context of why they're doing what they're doing. Also, the casting, Commissioner Gordon's really good in this. Besides that, I thought most of the casting was pretty off. It's definitely the weakest out of the 3 main Catwoman interpretations we've had. It's not a bad interpretation, but it's like the weakest. Alfred is easily the weakest we've had out of the 4 main interpretations. Smeagol does not make good Alfred. I'm sorry. He doesn't fit Alfred. If you don't do Alfred correct, or a character like Alfred, then you basically miss out on the fact that Bruce Wayne is a human, and that Batman is grounded in a reality, and that somebody cares about him. And this movie doesn't really have that, because he doesn't have that almost motherly possession of Bruce. This is just like, I don't even know who this guy is. And it feels kind of like that, where it's like, you had the definitive version of Batman, and this one comes after the Nolan trilogy. And I like a lot of the stuff with Batman, but I also dislike a lot of it. And then a lot of the cast are not as cool as the comic books, or as cool as the previous interpretation in the movies. So it just feels like some lesser version, some meandering version that's LARPing as a real movie. You know why this movie is 3 hours? It's because the director is undisciplined and does not know what to film, but also it's to LARP in the wake of the Joker and all of this talk of, are superhero movies real movies? It's to LARP as a real movie. Like, oh, well, Endgame is 3 hours long. That makes it a real movie. It's like, well, I mean, it's not really like a character-based drama. It's not a work of art. So when you make it 3 hours, you're basically LARPing as a real movie. Because The Lord of the Rings is an impactful, deep movie. A character-driven movie. That is a work of art. Really long, well-made, well-known movies, those are works of art. But it's like, they made this movie 3 hours to make it seem like, oh, well, it's a real movie. Yeah, but it's all stuffing. A lot of this movie doesn't even need to be there. So why would you say this is a real movie? That doesn't make any sense to me. The Dark Knight trilogy, all of them, are more concise, have more to say, they're more impactful, they're more funny, and they have more action scenes in them. So yeah, this movie's shot better. Congratulations, you know? You failed on almost every metric most people usually look on. I guess it's a real movie though, because everybody loves it. Because, oh, it's so well shot, and it's so dark, and it's so creepy, and there's barely any action in it. Scooby-Doo could solve this mystery, but there's not action in it. If there's action in it, that means it's a dumb movie made for little Marvel fanboys. Because there's a lack of action, then that means it's smart. You see, Miss Frizzle from the Magic School Bus could solve these mysteries and these riddles, but this movie is smart, you see. It's smart. This movie was made for, like, armchair intellectuals to call it the best movie ever. But in 20 years, I can guarantee you this Batman movie will not be looked at in favorable light. The Dark Knight trilogy will. Even The Dark Knight Rises, people criticize it all the time. The Dark Knight Rises will be seen in very positive light in 20 years. The Batman will have been forgotten, and most of this supposed new trilogy will not be good unless something fundamentally changes on how they make them. So I find it funny that nobody's actually pointing out what is considered bad in this movie was not considered bad by the media 2 years ago. Really, there should be tons of articles on the internet saying the Batman is right-wing propaganda because public property damage, graffiti, murdering politicians, all of that is bad in this movie. When really, just 2 years ago, the Twitter mobs were doxing people. There were riots on the streets, people were getting killed, all in the name of justice. And I find that the cognitive dissonance of people is so incredibly high that they did not notice that it's all the same things in this movie, but they don't consider it correct in this movie. They consider it bad. They think it's bad in the Batman movie, but in 2020, all of that stuff was for the greater good. And if you think the Twitter mob doesn't want to murder people, you don't go on Twitter enough. I also find it kind of comforting as well that people automatically assume that these things are bad and that the culture will move on from these things and they will not support doxing or graffiti or public damage or murdering people just because of their private lives or their mistakes in life. So it is kind of funny, the cognitive dissonance on one hand, but on the other hand, it makes me kind of happy that people realize all of that stuff is wrong. I thought it was really awesome that they furthered anti-white racism. I believe this is the first major movie I know that referenced white privilege, so that's great. Putting it out there in the ether, letting it affect our culture. And you can make the argument that yes, Catwoman would believe that type of ideology because she's an anti-hero. And I buy that, but it's not good for society. It's very toxic and divisive. It's kind of ridiculous that they mentioned that and gave a voice to anti-white rhetoric. But you know, that's Hollywood for you. See you in 3 years, kids, when we have a movie about Batman fighting the Riddler and the Joker. That is 3 hours and 12 minutes long, and it barely has any action in it. I feel like it'll be better, though. He'll probably learn. People need to stop kissing up to this movie's butt, though, and need to criticize it, because I want these movies to be better. And I think with Robert Pattinson and the director and the way they made the world, you can easily have a better next one. This feels like a misfire for me. This feels like a proof of concept. They need to get back on the game, make the next one better, make the next one funner, make it a fun movie to watch, exciting, pack a punch, and have a thematic into it. And don't film for 17 hours, Matt Reeves. So that was all for now, kids. Maybe next one will be better. Maybe. So we'll see, won't we? Y'all have a fantastic little day you got there. Yeah.